My brother wanted to kick me out of our house, but he forgot that I was paying all the bills and even his education, so I was the one who evicted him. So, I'm Devin, I'm 29, and I live in the house my family inherited after my dad passed away. It's nothing fancy, a two-story colonial that's got good bones, but definitely shows its age. I've been putting work into it ever since Dad died. New gutters, refinished floors, even tackled some plumbing myself after watching about 300 hours of YouTube tutorials. I'm a freelance IT specialist, which means I'm either glued to my screen debugging some client's mess or crawling under the house trying to fix the heating. Point is, I work. A lot. I carry my weight. My mom lives about 15 minutes away, but she's here all the time. We've been close since Dad died, and I help her out with groceries, doctor's appointments, that kind of thing. We've got this unspoken routine. I mow her lawn. She bakes too many cookies and leaves them at my door. It's not a bad setup. Logan, my younger brother, lived on the first floor. He's 24 now, just finished college a few months ago. I paid for his tuition, well, most of it. I dipped into what was left of my savings, sold my old 2011 Nissan Frontier for barely $6,000, and even picked up extra tech gigs to make it happen. Logan was always the golden child, not because he was arrogant about it or anything, but because he just had this shine about him. People gravitated toward him. Teachers loved him. He got invited to everything. My mom used to joke that he was born with a diploma in one hand and a scholarship in the other. After Dad died, Logan and I moved back in together. I took the second floor and set it up like a mini office studio space. Quiet, light-filled, perfect for working, and he got the bigger room on the first floor near the kitchen. We got along fine, mostly. I mean, we're brothers. We argued over thermostat settings and who forgot to take out the trash, but nothing major. It was working, until it wasn't. The shift happened slowly. At first, it was small things. Logan started staying out more, sometimes not coming home for days. He said he was crashing with friends, or studying late, or meeting with project groups. Okay, he's a college student, I get it. But then he graduated, and things didn't really change. He didn't get a job, not even an interview that I know of. Just hung around the house, slept in, disappeared again. Whenever I asked if he needed help with his resume or wanted me to reach out to some contacts in tech, he brushed me off. Said he had plans. Meanwhile, I was footing the bills. Property taxes, internet, groceries. I'd see him eat half a rotisserie chicken I'd just bought, drink the last of my almond milk, then vanish before the dishes were even rinsed. And the weird part? He never said thank you. Not once. I brought it up to Mom. I didn't want to complain, but I needed her to know what was happening. She just kind of sighed and said, "He's trying to find his path, Devin. Not everyone gets there at the same pace." I bit my tongue. She didn't mean it harshly, but it hit me anyway, like maybe she thought I'd had it easier. Like the years I spent fixing that house, paying bills, working 2 jobs at one point, weren't enough to count as struggling. Then Logan started acting different, less brotherly. He'd go days without talking to me, even when we were both home. Sometimes I'd come down to grab coffee and find him already in the kitchen, earbuds in, ignoring me like I was a stranger. I thought maybe he was going through something. Depression, maybe. I even offered to talk or help him find someone to talk to. He waved me off, said I was making it weird. It came to a head one evening about 2 months after his graduation. I just wrapped up a brutal 12-hour debugging session for a client in Boston, and all I wanted was a shower and something hot to eat. I came downstairs and found Logan in the living room with 3 of his friends, blasting music, smoking weed, and eating chips straight from the bag I'd bought that morning. No one acknowledged me. I cleared my throat, waited. Nothing. So I said, "Hey, could you turn that down a bit? I just finished a long day." Logan didn't even look at me. He just laughed and said, "You live upstairs, man. Go be a hermit or something." I didn't respond. I went back up, locked my door, and sat there stewing in my own house, wondering what the hell had changed. That night, I emailed a couple of real estate agents about getting an appraisal on the house. It wasn't like I was going to sell it. Not yet, but I needed to know what I was sitting on. It was still legally in my mom's name, but I'd been the one maintaining it, paying the bills, fixing everything. And lately, it didn't feel like home anymore. The next day, I confronted Logan. I waited until his friends left and caught him in the kitchen. I didn't yell. I just told him, calmly, that if he was going to live here, he had to start contributing. Rent, groceries, help around the house. Something. He looked at me like I'd just asked him to sell a kidney. "I don't owe you anything," he said. "You're not Dad." That hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted to be Dad, but because I'd spent the last 5 years trying to be there, for him, for Mom, for the damn house that kept this family standing. I told him if things didn't change, I'd have to ask him to leave. He scoffed. "You can't do that. It's Mom's house." He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't right. I didn't know it yet, But that conversation was the start of something way bigger, something that would change everything about how I saw my family and my place in it. I just didn't realize how far Logan, and maybe even my mom, would go to protect the version of the family they wanted to keep, and how easy it would be to push me out of it. It's strange how your brain chooses certain memories to pull up when things start falling apart. That week after the blow-up with Logan, I kept thinking about the day he got accepted into college. He was so damn excited. I remember he came home waving the acceptance letter like he'd just won the lottery. It was some mid-sized university a few hours away, nothing Ivy League, but it was solid, and it was exactly what he wanted. He was beaming, rambling about majors and dorm life and football games like he could already see himself there. Mom cried, of course. I think in her mind, it was like getting a second chance to do it all over again. With Dad gone by then, we didn't have savings, no college fund, not even a rainy day account. We had just barely managed to keep up with bills after Dad's funeral. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with her a few days later, going over the financial aid papers. Logan had some grants and a small scholarship, but it wasn't nearly enough. The tuition alone was overwhelming, not to mention housing, books, meals, everything else that piles on fast. She kept running the numbers on a notepad, crossing things out, circling others, mumbling to herself like maybe the math would change if she stared at it long enough. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Dev, I don't know how we're going to make this work." That's when I stepped in. I had a few solid freelance clients at that point, nothing huge, but enough to live on. I was still building my portfolio, still doing side gigs like website security audits, small-time app debugging, and anything that paid under the table when times got tight. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I could see Logan's face across the table, his excitement turning into dread as reality started to sink in. And I just couldn't let that happen. I told Mom not to worry about it. I'd cover the difference. She protested at first, said it was too much, that I should save that money for myself, maybe put it into fixing up the house or building my own future. But I told her it was fine. I told Logan to go, chase the life he wanted, that I'd handle the money stuff. He gave me this look like he wasn't sure whether to be grateful or embarrassed, and then he hugged me and said, "Thanks, man. I won't forget this." For years later, I think he already had, because I paid for everything. Every semester, every meal plan, every damn textbook he couldn't find a PDF for. When he needed a laptop in his sophomore year, I bought him a refurbished MacBook and loaded it with everything he might need. When the dorm raised rates in his junior year, I covered that too. When he called me out of breath one weekend because he was stranded after a party and his ride bailed, I sent him gas money and an Uber. Then, senior year, he called saying all his classes were on the other side of campus and the buses were unreliable. I dipped into my savings and wired him $3,000 to help him buy a used Honda Civic. I never made him feel bad about it. Never rubbed it in his face. It wasn't about that. I just wanted him to feel like he could move forward, to not have to drop out or be buried in debt before he even started his life. Every time I sent money, I told myself it was an investment in him, in our family. That maybe if I helped him now, we'd all be better off down the road. He'd graduate, get a good job, build something for himself. Maybe he'd even help Mom the way I had been for years. But the weird part is, no one ever really said thank you. Not in a meaningful way. Not once did Logan sit down and say, "Devin, I know this was a big deal for you." Mom would say things like, "You're such a good big brother," or "Your father would be proud," but it always came off like a throwaway line, like something you'd say out of habit. Not a real acknowledgement. I didn't need a parade or a plaque. I didn't do it for praise. But sometimes it would have been nice to feel like they saw it, like they understood what it cost me. Not just the money, but the time, the energy, the sacrifices. I went without a car for 3 years after selling the Frontier. I missed a vacation I'd been planning for almost a year because Logan's tuition payment had a late fee I didn't see coming. I pushed off renovating the upstairs bathroom because his final semester bill came in higher than expected. And still, I never brought it up. I let him live like he earned it all himself, because in my head, it was better to give him that illusion than to make him feel indebted. I figured maybe someday he'd understand. Maybe he'd grow up, look back, and see what it meant. Maybe when he had his own apartment, his own rent to pay, his own pile of bills waiting every month, he'd remember that someone kept him afloat when he didn't even realize he was drowning. But looking at him now, how he barely makes eye contact, how he acts like I'm just some roommate who nags him, I don't think he ever will. My dad died of a stroke just over a year before everything really started to go south. It happened on a Thursday morning, completely out of nowhere. One minute he was pouring himself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, and the next he was on the floor. I was the one who found him. I'd come over early to help him with the sump pump, something he'd been meaning to fix for weeks, and instead I ended up on the phone with 911, doing chest compressions while Mom stood frozen in the doorway. He was gone before the paramedics even got there. Just like that. No warning, no goodbyes. We were left with a house full of his things, stacks of old tax returns in the office, a drawer in the garage labeled mystery keys, and a hole in the middle of our family that we had no idea how to fill. The will wasn't complicated. Dad wasn't the kind of guy who liked to overthink things. It just said that the house was to remain family property. No specific divisions, no clauses. That was Dad for you. He believed we'd work things out like grown-ups. So, legally, everything went to Mom. She never questioned that. But in her mind, the house belonged to all of us, me, Logan, and her. We had a lot of conversations in those first weeks after the funeral. Most of them were around the dining room table, the one with the deep scratch in the middle from when Logan spilled nail polish remover during some middle school science project. I remember Mom sitting across from me, her eyes red from crying but her tone firm. She said, "This house is yours as much as it is mine. Your father wanted it that way." And I believed her. I think, in those early days, we all did. Logan was still in school at the time, just starting his senior year. He came home for the funeral, stayed a week, then went back to campus. We all agreed it made sense for me to stay in the house permanently. I was already living there part-time, helping with repairs, taking care of Mom. It just felt like the right move. The house needed work. Dad had left a lot of things half-finished, and someone had to handle the taxes, the insurance, the utilities. The agreement was simple. I'd stay in the house and take full responsibility for the expenses. That meant mortgage, what little was left, property taxes, gas, water, electric, maintenance, you name it. I even handled the trash collection service because Mom didn't want to deal with the online billing portal. Logan would stay at school, finish his degree, and start building his life. There were no formal papers signed, no legal titles transferred. We trusted each other. We were family. I told Mom I'd make sure everything stayed in good shape, that she wouldn't have to worry about anything. I meant it. For a while, that setup worked. I settled into a routine, working during the day, fixing things around the house in the evenings, visiting Mom every few days to help with errands. I set up my office on the second floor, the same room I used to sleep in as a kid. I replaced the windows myself, installed a proper Ethernet line through the wall, even mounted acoustic panels for client calls. It became more than a workspace. It felt like a new beginning. But the thing is, when someone dies, especially the person who used to anchor everything, things don't stay still for long. There's this silent shift that happens in a family, like the center of gravity moves. You don't notice it right away. You just start feeling a little off balance, like something is pulling you in different directions. At first, it was subtle. A cousin dropping a comment at Thanksgiving about how Devin's lucky to have the house. An uncle asking Logan what his plans were now that the house is all set. I'd brush it off, tell myself people just didn't know the arrangement. But over time, I started feeling like maybe even within the family, that understanding we had, that I was keeping the house afloat because I was paying for everything, was getting blurry. Still, I didn't bring it up. I figured Logan knew. We had that conversation in the garage, just days after the funeral. I remember he was leaning against Dad's old workbench, twirling a screwdriver in his hand like he used to when he was a kid. He said, "I know you've got it covered, man. Just give me a year to get my feet under me, and I'll pitch in." I nodded. That was the deal. I didn't push for more. I didn't ask him for rent or back payments or some formal split of ownership. I trusted that he'd keep his word. And maybe part of me wanted to believe we were still the kind of family where a handshake and a promise were enough. But promises don't pay for leaking pipes or replace the roof when a storm tears through half the shingles. They don't cover the unexpected hike in property taxes or the new water heater when the old one bursts in the middle of winter. That was all on me. Every single bill, every repair, every night I sat up researching how to do electrical work without killing myself. That was me. And maybe I could have handled all of that. Maybe I wouldn't have minded the silence, the lack of thanks, the gradual feeling of being taken for granted. But what I didn't see coming was that the very house I'd kept standing for them would eventually become the thing used to push me out. Logan came back into town a few weeks after graduation, pulling into the driveway with his old Civic packed full of clothes, electronics, and a suspicious number of protein tubs. Macy was with him. I hadn't met her before that day, but I'd heard her name enough times over the last few months. She was blonde, polished, and carried herself like someone who was always just a few steps ahead of the conversation. She gave me a quick smile when I opened the door, the kind that felt like she was already sizing me up before I even said hello. Logan walked in like he never left, set his duffel bag down in the hallway, and said, "Man, it's weird being back." He meant it in that nostalgic way, but there was something else in his voice too, something harder to place. We had dinner that night, just the three of us. I ordered takeout from that Thai place near the old hardware store, and we sat around the table while Logan talked about his classes, some guy named Tyler he hated, and how he'd been thinking a lot about what was next. Macy chimed in here and there, mostly with comments that sounded supportive but felt rehearsed. Then Logan leaned back in his chair and said, "I've been thinking, we should turn the house into something profitable." I remember just blinking at him for a second, trying to figure out what he meant. I asked if he was thinking about renovating, maybe turning the basement into a rental unit or listing a room on Airbnb. That I could wrap my head around. But he didn't really answer. He just said, "Yeah, something like that," and then changed the subject. I didn't push it. I figured he was still adjusting, still figuring out his plans. The idea hung in the air for a few days, vague and harmless. But then Macy started hanging around more, making suggestions that didn't feel like suggestions. She'd wander into the kitchen while I was making coffee and say things like, "It's so dated in here. Has it always been like this?" Or she'd pass by my office and glance at the secondhand shelves I built myself and say, "This room has potential if it weren't so dark and cluttered." At first, I brushed it off. I'd been living in that house long enough to stop caring what other people thought about the cabinets or the paint colors. But it wasn't just the house. Slowly, her comments shifted toward me. One night, while we were all sitting on the porch, she said, "Logan has so many ideas. It's just hard when you're surrounded by people who are kind of stuck in the past, you know?" She didn't look at me when she said it, but she didn't need to. The words landed right between my ribs. I laughed it off. I said something about how some of us are too busy paying the bills to come up with big ideas. Logan chuckled, but there was tension in his face, like he was trying to decide if he was on my side or hers. After that, things started shifting. Logan began bringing up the future of the house more often. He talked about adding a second entrance, maybe converting the attic, maybe selling off part of the yard. He used the word "we" a lot, like we were partners in some business plan I'd never signed up for. I reminded him that I was still paying for everything, the taxes, the maintenance, the insurance, and he gave me this look like I was missing the point. "We could be doing so much more," he said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of the living room. "But you're just comfortable. And that's fine, but it's not growth." I stared at him. "Logan, I'm not comfortable. I'm responsible. That's different." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he shrugged and walked away, and I could hear Macy's voice in the hallway a few seconds later, low and insistent. That was the first time I felt the ground shift beneath me in that house. It wasn't just Logan coming back. It was the way he came back, with ideas that weren't mine, with a partner who clearly didn't think I belonged in the picture. They talked like the house was some abstract asset, like it was just waiting for someone smarter to come along and turn it into what it was really supposed to be. But for me, the house was real. It was the creak in the stairs that Dad never got around to fixing. The scuff on the wall from when Logan tripped over his own feet during his high school graduation party. The back door handle I'd replaced 3 times because Mom always said it was too loose. It wasn't just a structure. It was our history. And maybe that's exactly why they wanted to change it. Because the history didn't belong to them anymore. Not the way it did to me. It came in a plain white envelope, the kind you'd expect to find a credit card offer in or a reminder to renew your car insurance. I almost didn't open it right away. It was sitting in my mailbox with a couple of utility bills and a coupon packet. I brought everything inside, tossed it on the kitchen counter, made a cup of coffee, and only got around to it after I'd fed the cat and checked my inbox. The return address was a local law firm I didn't recognize, and for a second, I thought maybe it was some kind of spam. But the second I saw the words "Notice of Eviction" at the top of the letter, my stomach dropped. I read the whole thing twice, slowly, making sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. Logan, my own brother, had filed for a forced eviction. According to the document, he claimed that the house belonged to our mother and that she had authorized the sale of the property. He argued that I was refusing to vacate and was now occupying the home against the expressed wishes of the rightful owner. I just stood there at the counter, holding the paper in my hands, unable to breathe for a moment. I felt like the floor had tilted beneath me, like the walls were suddenly closing in. For a second, I actually checked the envelope again, thinking there had to be some mistake. But there it was, black and white, clear as day. My brother was trying to kick me out of the house. The house I had kept standing. The house I had paid for, every month, every bill, every broken pipe and blown fuse and tax deadline. I called Mom. No answer. I texted her. Nothing. An hour later, I drove to her place. She opened the door with a look that was almost rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this moment, but couldn't quite bring herself to say what needed saying. She didn't even ask why I was there. She just stepped aside and let me in. I didn't sit down. I didn't take off my jacket. I pulled the eviction notice from my pocket and held it up. "What the hell is this?" She looked at it for a second, then lowered her eyes. "Devin, please don't raise your voice." "I'm not raising my voice," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm asking why my brother is filing to evict me from the house I've been taking care of for years." She still wouldn't look at me. Logan, he has plans. He wants to move forward with his life. He thinks the house could be. Could be what? I cut her off. Profitable? He's not even the owner. You are. So how is he filing anything? She hesitated. And that pause told me everything I needed to know. I gave him power of attorney, she said finally, her voice so soft I barely heard it. Just for the property. I didn't think he would use it like this. I just stood there, staring at her, not even sure what to feel anymore. Rage, betrayal, disbelief, they all hit me at once. You knew I was paying for everything. You know I've been keeping that house from falling apart since the day Dad died. And you let him do this. She said nothing. That silence burned deeper than anything else. I laughed once, short and bitter. So that's it. After everything, after paying his tuition, keeping the lights on, handling every bill while he was off playing college student, you're letting him throw me out like I'm squatting in my own home. He thinks it's time to move on, she said, almost robotically. He has a vision. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A vision. That was the word she used. Like we were talking about redecorating a living room, not appending my life. I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her see what was happening, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She had already made her choice. Whether it was out of loyalty to Logan or fear of conflict, it didn't matter. She wasn't going to stop him. I walked out without saying another word. Drove home with the windows down, even though it was cold, just to feel something sharp against my face. I sat in the driveway for almost half an hour, staring at the front steps I had repainted last spring, the porch I rebuilt when the wood started to rot, the gutter I fixed on a ladder in the middle of a thunderstorm. Every inch of that house had my fingerprints on it. My money, my labor, my time. And now Logan, the brother I'd sacrificed for, was trying to erase me from it like I'd never mattered. I don't know what kind of person you have to be to look someone in the eye for years and pretend you're family, while secretly planning to push them out the second it becomes convenient. But apparently, Logan became that person. And the worst part wasn't even the eviction notice. The worst part was knowing that he didn't do it behind my back. He did it with our mother's permission. I tried to talk to Mom again a few days after the eviction notice showed up. I didn't want to yell or fight. I just wanted to understand how he got here, how she could let Logan do something like this and still sleep at night. I called her twice. She didn't answer. I sent a text asking if we could meet and talk things through. No reply. Finally, I just showed up at her house. She opened the door and gave me a look like she'd been expecting this, but still hoped I wouldn't come. Her voice was polite but tight. Devin, this really isn't a good time. I asked her when a good time would be. She didn't answer. She didn't invite me in either. I stood on the porch while she hovered awkwardly behind the screen door like a neighbor she barely knew. I asked her, straight out, why she was letting this happen. Why Logan was being allowed to treat me like a stranger, like a squatter in the house I'd been carrying on my back since Dad died. She shifted uncomfortably and said, I just don't want to be in the middle of this. I stared at her, trying to process the absurdity of that. She was the middle of this. She was the one who signed the paperwork. She was the one who knew exactly what I was paying for every month, every year. Then she let something slip. She said, Logan's just trying to make sure everyone is taken care of. When I asked what that meant, she hesitated again, looked away, and muttered. He said once the house is sold, he'd help me get into one of those private retirement places, you know, with the pool and the wellness center. She tried to say it like it was nothing, like she wasn't telling me that she'd been bought off. But her eyes told the truth. She knew exactly what she was doing. Or at least, she knew enough to know that staying out of it meant letting someone else handle the dirty work. I asked her, is that all it takes? A pool? She didn't answer. That conversation stayed with me, like a bad taste I couldn't rinse out of my mouth. I thought I'd felt the full weight of betrayal when the eviction letter came. But hearing that Mom had a reason to stay quiet, that Logan had dangled comfort in front of her in exchange for her silence, that cut deeper than I was prepared for. Later that night, I came downstairs to grab a glass of water and heard Logan's voice through the wall. He was on a call, probably with Macy, since he was speaking in that slightly smug tone he always used when he wanted to impress someone. I didn't mean to listen, but the house isn't that big and the walls aren't that thick. He said, once it's sold, I'm putting some of it into a rental property and helping Mom move out. She's going to love the place I found. It's got a pool and a damn golf cart shuttle. Way better than this dump. I stood there, completely still. Then I heard Macy's voice, clear as day. It's time for your brother to grow up and find his place in life. He's been playing handyman in that house for way too long. It's holding you back. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew what they thought. I was the obstacle, the relic, the problem that needed to be removed so they could build their shiny new future. And the worst part? They didn't even hate me. That would have made more sense. No, they just didn't see me. Not really. To them, I wasn't a brother or a son. I was a placeholder. The guy who kept the lights on and the plumbing working and the taxes paid until they were ready to come home and take over. I went back upstairs that night and looked around at the room I'd built into an office, a studio, a place I'd poured years of my life into. The patched drywall, the desk I made from reclaimed wood, the Ethernet cables I ran myself. None of it mattered. Not to them. They didn't see the house I protected. They only saw what they could get out of it once I was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the office with my laptop open, scrolling through old folders, bank statements, receipts, emails. All the proof was there, buried in years of documents I never thought I'd need to defend myself with. Payment confirmations for property tax, screenshots of every utility bill, invoices for roofing supplies, HVAC service, the water heater replacement. I found a spreadsheet I used to track my freelance income, where I'd also listed every tuition payment I'd made for Logan, from his first semester deposit to the last rent check I sent him for his off-campus apartment. Thousands of dollars, all wired from my account, all with notes, Logan's tuition, Logan's car, Logan's books. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Hayes, an older guy with a voice like gravel and an office that smelled like dust and printer toner. I told him everything, from the day Dad died, to the agreement we had about the house, to the eviction notice that had hit me like a sucker punch. I showed him the documents, every receipt, every email, every transfer. He sat quietly through most of it, taking notes and occasionally nodding. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, looked at me, and said, "You've got more leverage than you think." He explained that while the house was technically in my mother's name, and Logan now had power of attorney over it, that didn't erase my financial contribution. My consistent payments toward property maintenance, utilities, taxes, all documented, could give me standing to claim a financial interest in the property, especially since I'd been the sole person maintaining it. And then there was the education money. He pointed at the spreadsheet and said, "You didn't just help your brother. You carried him." I asked him what my options were. I expected him to say something like wait it out, or try to settle it privately, or write a letter explaining the situation. But instead, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't play defense. Not with family like this. You've already seen what silence gets you." Then he leaned forward and said, "You file first." That was the moment everything shifted in my head. Up until then, I'd been reacting, scrambling to hold on, trying to reason, trying to make people see the truth. But sitting there in that office, hearing someone finally validate what I'd been living through, made something click. I wasn't being difficult. I wasn't being petty. I'd been exploited, used, and now I was being discarded like I never mattered. Hayes said we'd start by filing a partition action, basically, a legal claim to force the division or sale of jointly owned property. Since I had no deed, it wouldn't be simple, but with the paper trail I had, we could argue for equitable interest, especially with the financial records, especially with Logan's education expenses showing I'd supported him while he built the very future he was now using to cut me out. He also suggested we file a motion to freeze the sale process until the ownership dispute was resolved. That way, they couldn't quietly sell the house out from under me before I had a chance to fight back. I walked out of that office with copies of the paperwork we'd be submitting. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear this time. It was adrenaline. After all the silence, after being left in the dark by my own mother, after being undermined by the brother I'd supported for 4 years without question, I finally had a path forward. Not just to defend myself, but to be heard. It wasn't part of the plan. I didn't go to that lawyer thinking I was going to turn my family drama into some kind of public spectacle. But after I left Hayes' office, something kept gnawing at me. This quiet war they were waging, filing papers behind my back, whispering justifications to each other, pretending I didn't exist while planning to erase me from the house I had built. It wasn't just about property. It was about dignity. And I was done giving mine away. I opened my laptop that night and started typing. Not an emotional rant, not some vague subtweet. Just the truth. Plain, detailed, backed up with receipts. I attached screenshots of the tuition payments I'd made for Logan over the years. $4, $200 for his first semester, $1,100 for books and supplies, $3,000 wired to him for a used car his junior year. I included a breakdown of what I'd spent on the house since Dad died. $2, $800 for the roof repair, $900 for plumbing, $6,300 in property taxes over 2 years. I uploaded photos of the projects I'd done myself. New gutters, rebuilt porch steps, the basement I cleaned and rewired after it flooded last spring. Then I explained what was happening now. I wrote how my brother had filed to evict me from the house under the guise of progress, claiming our mother had agreed to sell it, while ignoring the fact that I had been the one paying for it, alone, for years. I wrote how my mother, who had once said this house was mine as much as anyone's, had gone silent after Logan promised to send her to a private retirement home with a pool. And I wrote about how Macy had stood beside him, pushing this narrative that I was the one holding them back, that I was the one stuck, while they were just moving on. I ended it with one line: I don't want sympathy. I just want people to know who I really am, and who they really are. Then I hit publish. I didn't expect what happened next. Within an hour, the post was spreading like wildfire. Friends shared it. Old coworkers, people I hadn't talked to since high school, started tagging each other in the comments. Messages started pouring in, people expressing shock, anger, support. Some shared their own stories about family betrayal. Others were just outraged at the sheer audacity of what Logan and Macy were trying to pull. A guy I'd once done freelance tech work for wrote, "Devin was always the one holding his family together. I can't believe this is happening." By the next day, it wasn't just my circle. Local news pages started picking it up. One outlet ran a piece titled, "Man Who Paid Brother's Way Through College Now Being Evicted by That Same Brother." The comments were brutal. People called Logan everything from spineless to heartless. Macy got dragged even harder. Some folks even started screenshotting her old posts and pointing out how many of them were about family values and loyalty. That didn't age well. And then, just like that, Macy vanished online. Her Instagram, her Facebook, even her Twitter, gone. Deleted overnight. I didn't celebrate. It didn't feel like a win. If anything, it just confirmed what I already knew. They had built their story on silence. On no one knowing what really went on behind closed doors. On everyone assuming I was just the bitter brother who couldn't move on. The moment that curtain dropped, they had nothing to stand on. What started as an eviction turned into something else entirely. A line was drawn. And this time, I wasn't the one standing in the shadows. It was a mutual friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, who finally gave me the missing piece. His name's Derek. We used to all hang out in high school. Me, him, Logan, a few others from the neighborhood. We drifted apart after graduation, but he still ran into Logan now and then, usually at the gym or the occasional house party. After everything blew up online, Derek reached out. Said he'd been watching it all unfold, and that he had some things I probably deserved to know. We met for coffee at this place downtown, nothing fancy. He sat down, looked me in the eye, and said, "I don't think Logan's trying to screw you just because he's a jerk. He's drowning, man. Like, seriously drowning." I just stared at him. Derek pulled out his phone and scrolled through some screenshots he'd saved from group chats and social media posts. Apparently, Logan had been talking to people over the past few months about how tight things were financially. His student loans were still unpaid. Not just government stuff. He had private loans, too, the kind with brutal interest rates. Macy had convinced him to finance a newer car after graduation, and on top of that, they'd started planning an engagement. There were photos of a ring, a payment plan, the whole 9 yards. But the most damning part? He hadn't just been broke. He was deep in the red. Overdrawn accounts, missed credit card payments, even a bounced deposit for a condo lease they'd tried to sign last spring. The fresh start he kept talking about, the idea of selling the house, moving mom into a resort-style retirement place, launching some big investment strategy. It wasn't ambition. It was desperation. This whole thing had never been about growth or vision or finally moving on from the past. It was about putting out fires. Financial fires that I didn't even know existed until that moment. Derek told me that Logan had been telling people he had to make something happen fast, and that Devin's just squatting in value we could all use. That last line hit me harder than anything. Squatting in value. Like I was just a placeholder for the profit they were waiting to cash in on. Not a brother. Not the guy who had paid for Logan's degree and kept the roof from collapsing on us both. I sat there, staring at my coffee, letting it all sink in. The truth was so simple, and so much uglier than I expected. Logan wasn't just entitled. He was cornered. The betrayal wasn't driven by some grand plan or ego trip. It was survival. He had built a life he couldn't afford, and when it all started to slip through his fingers, he looked around and decided I was the easiest thing to sacrifice. And the worst part? He knew I wouldn't fight back. Or at least, he thought I wouldn't. He banked on me staying quiet. Just like I had stayed quiet while I paid for his school. Just like I stayed quiet when I fixed the water heater, the roof, the broken foundation. Just like I stayed quiet when our mom chose to look the other way. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to be the one left holding the bag. Not while they tried to cover their tracks with my future. Not while they tried to sell off the one thing I had poured my life into just to clean up a mess I didn't make. The day of the hearing felt surreal. I sat on one side of the courtroom in a suit that didn't quite fit, hands cold despite the summer heat, watching as my own brother sat across from me with a smug look and a lawyer he probably couldn't afford. I wasn't angry anymore. I'd gone past that weeks ago. What I felt sitting there was something quieter, heavier. Like I was about to bury something I once cared about, and there was no turning back. Logan didn't look at me when I walked in. His lawyer did, though. A sharp woman in a tailored gray suit who immediately gave off the vibe that she thought this was going to be easy. Their whole position, as she laid it out, was that I had never been a legal owner of the property, that the house had always belonged to our mother, that I had lived there as a matter of convenience, and that my refusal to leave was nothing more than a grown man clinging to a childhood home he had no claim to. She described me as someone who remained in the residence for personal comfort and accused me of financially contributing in the way any tenant might, sporadically, and without ownership expectation. She even referred to me at one point as a freeloader with a garage full of nostalgia. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, Hayes, stood up with none of the flair the other side had. He didn't try to charm the courtroom. He just opened a binder and started presenting the facts. The utility bills, the bank transfers, the tax payments, all in my name, all paid from my accounts, all consistent. He showed receipts from Home Depot and Lowe's, tied to repair invoices. Then he pulled out the stack of bank records where I'd paid for Logan's tuition semester after semester, totaling more than what some people spend on a mortgage. Then came the kicker, a letter from my mother, signed and dated, where she'd written that Devin has taken full responsibility for maintaining the house since his father's passing, including all financial obligations. That letter wasn't recent. It was written almost a year before Logan had even filed for eviction. She probably forgot it existed, but I hadn't. The courtroom was silent as it all came out. No spin, just paper, dates, numbers, hard evidence. The judge asked Logan's lawyer if she had any documents to refute the expenses. She shifted uncomfortably and said that the payments were voluntary contributions and that my mother, as the owner, had the right to revoke any informal agreement. That's when Hayes pulled out the revised motion, the one we'd prepared just in case. Not only were we requesting the right to stay, we were suing for financial equity in the house based on documented contributions. I wasn't asking for the entire place, just what I had earned. The judge took a recess, and when we returned, his tone had shifted completely. He said the documentation showed not only a clear pattern of financial responsibility, but also proof of intent, that I had acted in good faith, maintaining and preserving a property I was promised shared interest in. He stated plainly that Logan's attempt to remove me from the house, using a power of attorney he obtained without transparency, was deeply questionable. Then he said the words I'll never forget. The court finds that Mr. Devin has an equitable interest in the property. He is not only permitted to remain in the residence, but is hereby granted a partial ownership stake equivalent to his financial contribution, with legal documentation to follow. Just like that, it was done. I didn't gloat. I didn't look at Logan. I just stood up, nodded at the judge, and walked out with my head clear for the first time in months. I had come into that courtroom accused of freeloading. I walked out with my name on the house I had already bled for, and no one could take that from me now. After the court ruling, I thought I'd feel nothing but relief. And I did at first, but it wasn't clean. It wasn't triumph. It was more like a slow exhale after holding your breath for too long. Necessary, inevitable, but heavy. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and quiet resentment. Logan and Macy didn't make it easy. They dragged their feet, acted like the ruling was some temporary inconvenience instead of the final nail. But once my ownership was locked in, there was nothing left to stall. I didn't buy Mom's share directly. I couldn't stomach that conversation, and I didn't trust her to make it without Logan whispering in her ear. So I worked with Hayes to set up a third-party agreement. One of those clean, neutral transactions where the money changes hands through someone else, and no one has to sit across a table pretending everything's fine. I paid more than I wanted to, less than she'd hoped for, and in the end, she signed. That was the line in the sand. When the sale closed, Logan and Macy had no choice. They moved out in one ugly weekend, slamming doors and muttering insults like teenagers being grounded for the first time in their lives. Macy barely looked at me. Logan tried once to act like it was all a misunderstanding, said something about how we could have worked it out without lawyers. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I watched them leave through the same front door they once planned to lock me out of. It didn't feel victorious. It felt quiet. Mom came by 2 days later. She stood on the porch like a stranger, holding a grocery bag with a homemade pie inside, like that was going to undo the last year. She didn't apologize. Not really. She said she regretted how things went and asked if I'd consider letting her move back in. Just for a little while. She said it softly, like she thought the tone might matter more than the words. I looked at her for a long time before answering. No, I said. This is my house, and trust doesn't live here anymore. She didn't argue. She just nodded like she'd expected it and turned to leave. I didn't watch her walk away. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of something end. In the weeks that followed, I started reclaiming the place. Not just physically, but piece by piece, room by room. I turned the downstairs guest room into a proper studio, finally set up my lighting and gear without worrying about someone messing with it. I built a new desk in the upstairs office, one that fit exactly the way I wanted. I replaced the old couch in the den and added a small rec space with a projector and a secondhand surround system. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just mine. The silence felt different now. It wasn't the kind that creeps in when people stop talking to you. It was clean, undisturbed, free. I woke up in the morning and made coffee without resentment burning in my chest. I sat at my desk and worked without the sound of muffled arguments or the tension of unspoken betrayal hanging in the air. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to show up, take credit, or take over. The house was mine. The space was mine. The peace was mine. And I finally understood what it meant to live on my own terms. A few weeks after everything settled, I sat down at my desk late one night and opened up a blank post window. I wasn't planning on writing anything long. I wasn't trying to stir anything back up, but the words came out in one stream, like they'd been sitting inside me waiting for the right time. I typed, "Don't let those you sacrificed for turn your goodness into your judgment. Don't let them make you feel small for doing what they would never do. There's a difference between being generous and being used, and sometimes the line gets blurry, but trust me, you'll know the difference when you're the one bleeding and they're still asking for more." I hit publish and went to bed without thinking much of it. By morning, the post had gone viral. Messages poured in from people who'd gone through their own family betrayals, people who had put their lives on hold for siblings or parents or partners who left them out in the cold the second it became inconvenient. People said they saw themselves in my story, that it gave them clarity, that it gave them courage, that they finally understood why their exhaustion wasn't weakness. It was the cost of constantly giving without ever being considered. That post reached farther than anything I'd ever shared. And for once, it wasn't the story of a man quietly losing pieces of himself to keep a family together. It was a story about reclaiming something, about saying enough. As for Logan, the last I heard, he was living in a rented studio apartment above a liquor store on the east side. The Civic I helped him buy was repossessed, and he's still carrying loan debt from school and Macy's ring. I don't know where she went. I don't ask. I don't care. Someone told me he's been saying things like family is supposed to help each other, and that he's hoping to reconnect with good people again. Translation, he's looking for someone else to drag him out of the hole he dug. But I'm not that person anymore. Kindness is a beautiful thing until it becomes a weapon in someone else's hands. I learned that the hard way. I learned that being dependable, being the one who always steps up, only works when the people around you value what you give. And when they don't, you have to be willing to walk away, or you'll drown trying to keep them afloat. Now, the house is quiet, steady, mine. The doors are locked not out of fear, but out of peace. There's no knocking I dread, no footsteps I listen for upstairs. Just the rhythm of my own life finally settling into place. Thanks for sticking with me through this story.